So in 2.1, we kind of mentioned that there are two types of word problems out there. And the first one that we already dealt with through part 1 through part 5 were the ones that say the number, a number, some number. By looking at this problem, you can see this is different because it says the sum of two consecutive integers is negative 67. Notice it doesn't say the number, a number, some number, but it has a new word, consecutive. So we're going to have to deal with some consecutive problems. You do have both on your unit test. So you will have some consecutive ones and you will have some the number, a number. Right? So let's talk about consecutive. What does consecutive mean? Consecutive just means the next. Okay? There are two types of consecutive problems that we're going to be working with. And I know it's very hard to see on this board, but I was trying to use the same notes just to say the only thing that really changes too much is this second step and this fifth step. That's the only thing that really changes. So it's a little hard to see, but it says, because we don't have the number, a number, some number, I had to change it. And the rule for number 2 says, determine what type of consecutive problem that you're working with. And there are two types. A is the ones that just say consecutive integers. Consecutive integers means that you just want the next one over, okay? So if I said, what's the next number after 11? You tell me it's 12. And the next one after 12 is 13. So each time I go over one space, it's just adding an extra 1. Because this is like 11, add 1, that's how you get 12. And to get this one, notice it says x plus 2. Take the original number, 11, and add 2. And then that's how you get 13. So you can see each gap increases by 1. See, 0 plus 1 plus 2. It's just increasing by 1. The second type that we're going to deal with is the ones that have a condition with it. It's not only consecutive, but there's a certain type. Consecutive even or odd integers. Now it doesn't matter if you're working with even numbers or odd numbers, the gap is always an extra 2. So if I asked you what's the next even number after 20, you would say not 21, but 22. Remember, even numbers end in 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. So we had to skip over an integer. From 20, we had to skip over 21 to 22. There was a gap of 2. The same thing plays with the odd numbers. If I said, what's the next consecutive odd number after 5? You have to skip 6 to go to 7. Because remember, odd numbers end in 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. No matter what, you're skipping just one number, so the gap is always 2. Even if you're talking about even numbers or you're talking about odd numbers. So you have to determine what chart you're going to use or what type. Are you going to do A, where we're going to be doing x's and x plus 1s and maybe x plus 2s? Or chart B, where we're doing with x, x plus 2, and maybe x plus 4. Why would I might use just these two and not the third one? Well, it depends on the problem. If it said the sum of 2, then we would only use the first 2. If it said the sum of 3 consecutive, then I would have to use 3 of these guys. And that doesn't mean it can't go on to a fourth one. You know, we could have had x plus 3 here, and we could have had an x plus 6 here if I want 4 consecutive. This could go on and on forever. All I need you to know that there are two different types. The ones that don't have anything that conditionalizes it, it just says consecutive integers. And then the other type is when they put a condition saying, no, it has to be consecutive odd or consecutive even integers. Once we figure out what type we're using, then all the other steps are the same, except for step 5, where we're going to have to be mindful of these words, smaller or larger, or first integer, second integer, or third integer. because we don't have the variables, but variable expressions. Now, what are variable expressions? These are variable expressions. See how it has the variable and the constant? Variable and the constant. So we're dealing not with just plain variables, but also constants. So you got to be mindful of that. So anytime I hear the word first or second or larger or smaller, we're going to use parentheses so I can plug in the correct expression. Okay, so let's go to this board. The first thing that we always have to do is read the problem. So just like we did, go from left to right. The sum of two consecutive integers is negative 67. Then you're going to look to see if there's any danger words. Do you have the word from up here? Do you have the word than? No, I don't. Next, new step. Determine what type of consecutive. Are we doing the x and the x plus 1s? Or are we doing x and skipping a number to get to x plus 2? Does this problem say even, odd, or doesn't mention it? Notice it says two consecutive integers. It does not mention it. So then that just tells me, cross this out, and know that we are going to be using the top here, A, consecutive integers. We're going to be using x, x plus 1, and if it asks us for 3 consecutives, x plus 2. Notice our problem says 2 consecutives. So I don't need all 3 of them. I just need x and x plus 1. If it said 3 consecutives, well then I need x, that's your first, x plus 1, that's your second, x plus 2, that's your third. Okay? But because it says 2, I know I'm just dealing with x and x plus 1. So that's what consecutive integers mean. Okay. Now that I determine what type of consecutive problem I'm going to use, let's see if we can translate any key buzzwords into operations. You know is equal sign. Sum of, that means I'm going to have to add something. Well, I crossed out almost all my words there. Next, I want to see if I had any ands that I didn't cross out. Yeah, I don't have any ands in this statement, so I don't have to worry about being careful of ands. So now what I want to do is rewrite the problem. Okay. Now when I rewrite the problem, if I start reading it, it says sum. How many problems you know start off with an addition symbol, or a division symbol, or a subtraction symbol, or multiplication symbol? It usually starts off with a number, or it starts off with a variable, not an operation symbol. So you're going to have to figure out, oh look, there's a gap here. We're going to put this plus sign not in front, but here. Sum of these two guys. So let's write it like that. X, that's your first integer, plus, because that's sum, your second integer, x plus 1, equals negative 67. Okay? So that's what this is saying. Add these two items. So here's item 1, here's item 2, and we're adding. Now that I have written this out into an equation, notice it has no words, it just has what? Numbers, variables, and operation symbols. Then we can solve this. Now in the solving step, you just got to be careful on what the question's asking for, okay? So I left it up here, find the larger integer. We'll get to that in a second. Let's first solve for the variable x. You know you have a right-hand side and a left-hand side, so I draw my line. You know I focus on one side of the equation to simplify. You ask yourself, do I have any parentheses? No. Do I have any like terms? Variable, variable, constant. Yes. Two variables. Remember, collect or circle. If they don't have a coefficient in front, we can slip in a 1. So 1x, this is a positive, this is a positive. We add because they're the same labels. And who wins the tug of war? Even though it's a tie, it doesn't matter. That's a positive team, that's a positive team, that's going to stay positive. Bring down the +1. Now there's nothing left to simplify here because that's a coefficient now, variable constant. Over here you can see that definitely is no parentheses, just a constant, can't combine. Label. Only side that has a variable. That means by default this must be constant. It's going back to that 2.1, 2.2 stuff. And then let's move this +1 because it's not a variable, so you have to do the additive inverse, opposite sign. Whatever you do to the left, you have to do to the right. They cancel out, so you have 2x. And here you have a negative, and you know, same labels, you add, we get 68. Who wins the tug of war? Is it going to be just the one person playing on the rope, or the 67 men playing on the rope? You know, team 67 is going to win, so this is going to be team negative. Right. Finally, get rid of the coefficient. So the coefficient is +2, so I'm going to divide both sides by +2. So I get x equals -34. Now, we're not done. Even though I solve for x, this is what I mean by pay attention to what the directions say. Sometimes they'll say find the smaller integer. Well, if you think about x versus x + 1, this would be your smaller, okay? Anytime that you add 1 to anything, you're making it bigger. So this would be larger. So if this says find the smaller integer, that means find what x is. Do we know what x is? -34. But this doesn't say find the smaller integer. This says find the larger integer. Okay, so you gotta remember, if it says larger, when there's 2 of them, this is the larger one. So I need to have x and add 1 to get to the larger one. Do I know what x is? Yes. But I have to add 1. Be careful. I know some of you are going like, oh, I know, it's -35. No. Okay. X, -34, +1. Collect. Oh, now you see it. A negative and a positive. We actually have to subtract. You're going to get not 35, but a 33. And then who wins the tug of war? 34 players or 1 player? You know team 34 is going to win. So it's team negative. Now some people have a hard time because they're going like, wait a minute. If your first integer was -34 and your second integer is -33? Well, remember negatives. Remember, think of it as money that you owe someone. You will always pick the larger amount. Would you rather owe someone $34? Would you rather owe someone $33? I'd rather owe someone $33. That's larger. So -33 is larger than -34. Also, you can think about it. If I add these two together, negative plus negative, add, we're going to get -67 is -67. Because it says find the larger, do not put your answer as -34. Make sure your answer is -33. If the question says find the integers and you want both, then you have to tell me it's these two items. Right? So you got to be careful if it says find larger, find smaller, or find the integers. But that's how you do this problem.